After 20 years of leading NACS, Henry Armour is stepping down as president and CEO at the end of 2025, but he will continue to lead NACS international activities. I sat down with Henry to discuss his biggest focus areas, or as I called them, buckets, over the last 20 years. They have been fostering a positive culture, cultivating financial strength and discipline, the importance of advocacy, building out the industry's business acumen, and visualizing a global marketplace. Let's take a listen. So let's talk. You've been CEO for 20 years. Let's talk about looking at the past 20 years. You've largely looked at NACS as 5 different buckets that you've addressed. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the 5 buckets were, and then let's talk a little bit about each of them?
Sure, you think through buckets more than I do. So, yeah, absolutely. So, where do you want to start, Jeff?
First off, the idea of creating culture and that building the proper culture at this organization. Can you talk about your philosophy and what you've done to build the culture here?
Sure. So, all organizations, all families have cultures. 95% of them, I believe, are unintentional cultures. I believe in intentional culture, right? And really, my job, I think a leader's job is to create an environment that talented people can achieve far more together than they could individually, right? And that's really what I've just tried to do at NACS, is to create an environment in which super talented people, we have an amazing staff here, can achieve far more together than they could individually, right? So how do you do that, right? How do you do that? What does that really mean? And to me, culture is very intentional. You can measure it. You need to understand what creates great outcomes, right? What creates great outcomes? It's a lot of science behind this, right? I think what in the research shows that what creates great outcomes are constructive behaviors, right? So I've tried to create a culture that relishes diverse perspectives, right? People are, if you have the right people, they're experts in what they do, but they're only experts on the facet of the diamond that they're responsible for. They don't see the other facets of the diamond, right? So in order to create the best possible decisions, outcomes, and so forth, you want to have diverse perspectives, right? You want to relish debate, but that debate at some point needs to come together with a direction forward, a decision, a here's what we're going to do. And that debate needs to be done in a really constructive manner. Not a manner that my idea is better than your idea. More of a matter of, I don't understand your idea. Help me understand that, right? Rather than starting with my point of view. So it's creating a culture that relishes internal debate over different perspectives, then are constructive in that debate and comes together. You know, I believe Jim Collins, who I spent time with at Stanford Business School, Jim wrote Good to Great, Built to Last, just seminal business books about organizational behavior. One of the things that Collins, says as part of his model is, you have to get the right people on the bus, you have to get the wrong people off the bus, and you need to get the right people in the right seats on the bus. I agree with all of that, but I also think the bus you got to create, and the bus is your culture. As I said a little bit earlier, I believe the difference between good organizations and great ones are their people and their cultures and how they interact with with one another. So the process with culture is a very deliberate one. It's an intentional one. There's lots of tools involved in doing it, but it's all about people. It's all about understanding, an organization, most organizations, not all, but a lot have core values. The difference between core values and culture is core values is kind of how you like to behave. The culture enables you to behave in a fashion that's aligned with your core values, right? So it's the operational part of it, the execution part of it. And then the final thing about culture is that it's a never-ending journey. I'm very proud of the cultural transformation we've been able to pursue and achieve, right, over really the last 18 years. I listened for 2, as I was saying earlier, to understand where we were going to go, really. I'm very proud of that, but it is a journey that never ends. So if an organizational culture is high performing at the end of the day, I think NACS's culture is, and we do a lot of research, we're one of the most constructive, best outcome producing cultures that is around out there when we benchmark about the others. At the end of the day, if we feel that way, tomorrow morning when we get up, we better go to work on our culture. It's a never-ending journey, and the moment that you take your foot off the gas, the moment that you think you're in good shape with culture, is the moment that things will start to go south. So it's a never-ending journey that's a fun journey. It's a fun journey, but it's really being a kind of conductor of the orchestra, of the symphony, and making sure everybody is playing together.
Culture's not about being nice. It's much deeper than that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when we interview people here, we do a lot of interviewing. The department that is hiring a person is really focusing on skill sets. Does candidate have the skills we need in the position 3 years from now? We try and look forward. And then we have cross-department interviews of every candidate, and what they're really trying to assess is, will this person be a good cultural fit? So an interviewee is hearing about culture, right? And then they arrive, and they don't really understand what culture is. They think, as you just said, culture is just, hey, this is a place where everybody's nice. That's not what culture is. Culture is about constructive engagement. It's about respecting and relishing diverse perspectives so that you can see all facets of the diamond before you make decisions and so forth. It is not squishy at all. It's measurable. We have lots of tools to measure both organizational culture and individual behaviors with respect to culture. There are lots of tools. Some are very analytical, which I love because I'm an analytical guy. But we also have, fun ones that are we call them the birds and so forth, which is all about how we communicate, how we speak, how we hear, how we listen, how we have to flex on the way we speak or the way we listen, not depending on how we do it, but how the person we're communicating with does it. We have strength finders, we have emotional intelligence stuff, because, everybody has a little bit of a different receptivity filters, right? Some aren't quite as analytical as I might be, some like a little lighter touch over here, but everything is built upon the foundation of what we call human synergistics, the model we use in measuring our culture.
One of the things you've recently said is your most important job is to present the new CEO with the best, most culturally positive organization you can.
Yes, I think that's right. I made a commitment that I wasn't going to hand off problems to my successor, right? I mean, it will be their culture to lead in the future. It won't be my culture. It is the culture of 80 people here at NACS. There are different leadership styles, but I think we're really well grounded in culture, and a lot of those are tools, we use. There's activities we use. There's fun activities, staff stuff. But there are elements, like 15 years ago, I introduced what I call quints, which I get together once or twice a year, 5 people at a time, hence the word quints, each from a department department, and all of them below my direct report level. And it's really their meeting to share with me as CEO their thoughts on how to make this a better place. Now, I have questions that, I throw out at them, but that's part of our culture. And I believe when I talk to them, they not only appreciate the time I take in doing this, because they're like 2-hour meetings, 14 or 15 meetings. It takes 2 weeks to go through this. And it's all about listening, right? It's all about poking and prodding. And at the end of those 2 weeks, I prepare a debrief for the entire staff, the next full staff meeting we have. And I go through everything I've heard. Everything I've heard, right? So they know I'm not editing these things, right? And sometimes I put, a green stoplight by one or traffic light yellow or red to say that was a brilliant idea. We're going to do that. We may have already done it by the time I give the debrief. A yellow means, hey, interesting, but I need to investigate that more. I need to think through that a little bit more. I need to kind of kick that around a bit, right? And red means I heard you, which is really important to put up stuff that I heard, but we're not going to do anything. Like, we want sick leave. Heard that? No. Red traffic light. We're not doing that, right? Those types of things. So I think culture, it's about people. There's a lot of trust that goes on. And maybe we'll get into how do you build trust and some of the journeys we've had, some of the episodes we've had to deal with at NACS that either can tear an organization apart, tear a family apart, or bring it together more closely.
Second bucket that I'd like to talk about is financial strength and discipline. And when you started, we had 3 goals, and financial strength was added to that, financial discipline. Talk a little bit about financial strength and discipline and the importance of that.
So these aren't goals, these are values, right? And core values should help you decide, anybody in an organization, on how to respond to something. So when I became CEO, there were 3 core values that not only were on the wall, I mean, quite frankly, people actually knew them, right? They were do the right thing, think long term, and in their terms or in our customers' terms. And those are still core values here. They are still really important and really guide how we behave, how we approach stuff. And after a few years of being CEO, I bring in organizational behaviorists to help me make this a better place. And we talked about core values, and they said, well, your staff leaders, when you ask what the core values are, they all raise their hand up and they recite, do the right thing, think long term in their terms. Wonder how deep those are in the organization. So the next round of quints I did that year, I asked, so do we have any core values here? Any. And I was actually surprised that in most quints, people said, do the right thing, think long term in their terms. And then in almost every quint, there was one or more people that said, no, there's 2 more core values here that guide our behavior. And I said, really? What are those? And they said, strive for excellence and be fiscally responsible, which warmed my heart, right? Because, there's a difference between perfection and excellence. I have a lot of perfectionism in me, so I've learned a lot about the difference between perfection and excellence, and you got to let things go, not when they're good enough, but when they're excellent, because the market will tell you the last 10 or 15% on how you make it perfect, right? Not you. But then the other thing, this fiscal responsibility, there's not a lot of things you can do if you don't have the resources to do it, right? And I'll walk you through 2 kind of things that cemented that in my mind. First of all, when we were lobbying to reform debit fees, leading up to passing the Durbin Amendment 11, 12 years ago, that, by the way, is saving our industry over $1 billion a year. But in leading up to that, we're up against, the banks and the credit card companies who have more money than God, right? They're the most well-financed organizations to go to battle against, as you can imagine, right? And we didn't have the money to do that. Now, what we had were the voices in the industry to combat that, but we did need enough money to wage a credible battle, right? And NACS didn't have that money. So for 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 years, I was on the road all the time, pitching, soliciting, stating the case for our battle against swipe fees, and we raised $11 million from doing that. But I really recognize that for NACS to be effective long-term, NACS needed to have an economic engine to create resources that we didn't have to go out before every battle and raise funds for it. So I learned that. And then the other story about being fiscally responsible, and when you have the resources, it allows you to do a lot of things. We're hosting our Convenience Summit Europe in Berlin 5 or so years ago. And at the time, ESG was a hot topic, and certainly in Western Europe, everybody was all over ESG, saving the planet, broad government, societal stuff, all of that. It was it was the dominant corporate mandate, right? So I put together a mega session on ESG, and I invited 4 of our members to do presentations on their ESG strategies. And the first one up on the stage was a Norwegian company that shared with the audience how they were designing stores and they were saving the planet and all of this. And in Q&A is like, what's the ROI? The cost is very expensive. There's no QA, there's no ROI on it, but we're doing the right thing, right? And then the next person up was executive from a French member company of ours, and as the French always do in a very elegant fashion, laid out their ESG strategy. Then we had an Irishman who was kind of like, well, we're trying to figure it out, but it's the thing we ought to do, and so forth. And then the final speaker was the CMO of Opet. Opet is the largest convenience and fuel retailer in Turkey. So he's a Turkish guy, kind of a heavy-set guy, and he gets up to the podium and he looks out over the audience and he goes, you have to remember the number one objective that we should all have is to make money. And like all the oxygen went out of the room. Could just look at the audience, they're all thinking this heathen from Turkey. And he had a wonderfully long, pregnant pause. And then he said, it's what we do with the money that's important. And he launched into the women's empowerment program that Opet had put together in a culture that really doesn't believe Turkish culture and women's empowerment. But it was the right thing to do. Super impressive, super comprehensive. And he ended by saying, but we couldn't do any of that unless we made money, right? So it is resources, it is being fiscally responsible that allows you to generate the resources to use to do the right thing, to think long term, those to strive for excellence. Without the resources, you can't do those things. You can't follow the rest of your values.
So to a certain extent, fiscal responsibility allows you to stay in business every year, which is important. Financial strength allows you to take on things where you're punching above your weight.
Oh, no question about it. But financial strength will erode if you don't have fiscal responsibility. The other thing is people can understand. So we have to translate some of our goals, let's say, or values to resonate with not just you as a staff leader, but with the person in the mailroom and everybody in between. So being fiscally responsible, so what's that mean to the mailroom person, right? And many people in between. So we have internal goals / values. The one that matches up with them that they created was grow your revenue, own your spend. Oh, so our mail clerk understands that. Own your spend perfectly. So they'll RFP overnight deliveries every 6 months because they're the ones that are incurring that expense. So it is actionable at all levels of an organization. And being fiscally responsible doesn't just mean, I've got so much money to spend on this thing that's approved in the budget. It's when you get to that is, should I spend that? Has the times changed where I don't really need to spend that, or I can spend that money more effectively doing this instead of that when we put the budget together 8 months ago wasn't an opportunity, wasn't an option.
when you talk about own your spend, that really leads into the third bucket, which is advocacy. And you have talked about advocacy has a voracious appetite.
Yeah.
It is very expensive and it is very important. It is the reason we exist. So that looking at that third bucket, talk about why it's so important that NACS focuses on advocacy.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about my perspective of advocacy and how NACS has gone about it, maybe some examples of it, right? I brought up a few minutes ago our battle to reform debit fees, right? And we were up against the most well-capitalized organizations, banks and credit card companies in the world. And our value, we don't have that money. We'll never have that amount of money. But what do we have? We have voices, right? We have members. We're an industry that serves half the population every day, right? So we have voices. So how do we advocacy is about harnessing the resources you have, and we did a spectacular job of harnessing those to get debit fee reform, right? We ran a nationwide campaign where we had, I think, 35 or 50 million signatures on petitions to reform swipe fees and so forth. So you got to advocate not just to the regulators and the legislators, you got to advocate with your members to be able to enable them to advocate on their own behalf, right? Super powerful. The other thing is, particularly in that arena of advocacy, people matter, relationships matter, right? They really matter. During the whole years leading up to debit reform, we had a lot of strategies, one of which we developed was what we called the small state Senate strategy, right? So House seats are allocated by population. So California, I think, have 53 House seats, right? Representatives in Congress, right? But in the Senate, every state has 2 Senate seats. So my home state is Wyoming. It is the least populated state in the United States. We have 1 congressperson, 1. California has 53. We're never going to win in the House, right, with those odds. But in the Senate, guess what? We have 2 and California has 2. And by the way, when you're in a small state, all the politically influential people have personal relationships with their senators, right? It is those relationships that allow you to move the ball when it's good public policy. So when the Durbin vote came up, it was like 50-50. We were just about ready to lose that vote. And I called John Barrasso, our junior senator from Wyoming, who had said he was going to vote against the bill. And I called him up on his cell phone when he was walking to the Senate floor. And I said, John, spent a lot of time with you on this issue. This is the right thing to do. Mike Enzi, our senior senator, who I also had a great relationship with, is a Republican sponsor of this. You need to be brave and vote for this amendment. And he did, and we passed Durbin. That was not Henry Armour having any great skills or stuff. That was just showing the importance of personal relationships in advocacy. So that's kind of the legislative regulatory piece of that. But advocacy at NACS is much broader than lobbying. It's advocating on behalf of the industry to a number of different stakeholder groups. And let me walk you through a few examples. And you have been involved in most of them at various points. You may recall when Barack Obama was president, Michelle Obama very publicly attacked our industry, accusing us of being the single greatest cause of youth obesity because of the products we sold. NACS went to PHA, Partnership for a Healthy America, that Michelle Obama was a public spokesperson for, and said, let's sit down and talk. Again, person to person, as I said earlier. And it's like, what do you really want here, right? What do you want? And in those conversations, things would come up like, we don't want anybody to drink Coca-Cola. Well, that's not going to happen, but what do you really want? We don't want them to drink Coca-Cola. What do you really want? Took a while. We actually want them to drink more water. Bingo. We can make that happen. We can make that happen. You will never get the corporate world on board with arguing against prohibiting a legal product, but we can come on board if you said, hey, we want you to drink more water. So we put together a coalition. You were instrumental of it with Coke and Pepsi, who make a lot of water, right? To form and advance the Drink Up program, right? Static clings, drink more water, all of that stuff. Suddenly, Partnership for a Healthy America went, oh, this is very interesting. You guys have a different way. You actually have helped us move the ball a little bit towards a healthier America. What else can we do, right? And our first big member that signed a commitment with PHA was Quick Trip with a K out of La Crosse, Wisconsin, who at the time I think was selling, 100 or 150 pounds of bananas a day in each store, which is a phenomenal amount. And they made a commitment to sell 400 or 250 or something. Today they sell 400 pounds of bananas. And sat down with Partnership with America and we said, hey, this is about options. This is about, we're not going to stop selling the stuff we currently sell because our customers want to buy it. But let's work together and put healthier options up there. Super successful, right? So it's telling that positive story. We went another story, went to Make America Beautiful Again, right? Because we were getting all this attacks on the industry that we were creating all this trash, right? And I think we commissioned a study from University of Michigan or someplace to look in the trash cans at convenience stores. What they found was 80% of the trash in the trash cans weren't from our stores, they were from QSRs down the street, right? And with that data, then we engaged an organization, Make America Beautiful Again, to really debunk this myth that we were creating the trash. And then a third example was our members were really having a problem getting building permits for new stores. And the big pushback in planning commissions and city councils were 24-hour convenience stores. They generate too much traffic, they make too much noise, they create too much light at night. And we said, whoa, time out a little bit. Let's look at the other side of the story. Who do the valued people, the first responders in our communities that work graveyard shifts, where do they go after work or on the way to work? The nurses, the EMT people, the firemen, the policemen, where do they go? And we crafted the advantages that the value that our industry brings to community, because we are 24 hours. Super, super powerful. And out of that, through the NACS Foundation, we launched 24/7 Day, which I think the first year we had, 3 or 5 companies participate with a couple hundred stores. This year we had, 70 countries, 30,000 stores on 24/7, July 24th, honoring and providing some sort of reward to first responders that day coming into our stores. So advocacy is storytelling. And it's many times, you've been a master at it, other people in our organizations, our members are masters, many times of turning lemons into lemonades, right? 24 hours is bad? No. 24 hours quite thirst quenching for a lot of people. Oh, I didn't realize that, right? It's we want you to stop selling all these products. Well, wait a minute, that's what our customers want to buy, but we can add, healthier options. It is storytelling is what advocacy is really all about. And it's broad, right? Another one, a commercial one, and again, I think you were responsible for it, but 15, 18 years ago, above the fold front page, USA Today, the day before Christmas was, what's the best place to buy last minute stocking stuffers? And it was number one, convenience stores, right? To buy lottery tickets or whatever. That's what advocacy is all about. It's advocating on behalf of our industry.
Advocacy is about adding context, not, I think when most people think advocacy, their concept is we must stop bad things from happening. But it's really telling your story, adding context, finding common ground, and building out a coalition.
I think you're absolutely right, with one addition. It better be for the better good of society. NACS absolutely does not take, and we're somewhat of a rare association in this regard. If it's bad public policy, but it would favor our industry, we just don't fight that battle. We don't go down that street. And the reason why we don't go down that street is that every day, every month, every year, there are new issues that arise. And our credibility is bringing fact-based, good public policy to the table, right? Advocacy at NACS is based on facts. We don't put lipstick on a pig here, right? It's got to be good, sound public policy, or we're not going to go there. And I know it's frustrating to us sometimes. It's frustrating to some of our members because, hey, if we did this, it would really benefit the industry, but it's not going to benefit the country.
So, fourth thing that we'll talk about in this bucket, if this bigger picture things that you've overseen or helped lead, is business acumen. The idea that we need to be smart as an industry, and that doesn't necessarily mean something you pull off the shelf that might work in another channel. And business acumen is about getting the right data for our members and about getting the right educational tools for our members. Can you talk about the importance of business acumen within our industry?
Sure. So let me go way back in my education, my dad's perspective, that the most important thing is to train your brain, which means having the educational exposure and tools you acquire through education to address an ever-changing world, ever-changing technology, ever-changing regulations, ever-changing consumer preferences, right? It's a very dynamic world. So one needs to have acumen, smarts, be a little less highfalutin, smarts, right, to deal with that. And when I was chairman of NACS back in 2002, Howard Stokel, who was on our executive committee, deep background in HR. I think prior to he was CEO at the time of Wawa, but prior to that he ran HR for Wawa. And in our executive committee, Howard brought up that the industry needed better leadership education. So NACS at the time, I was chairman, we worked on developing an executive leadership program at Cornell. That is now 23 years old or something, sells out every year, high net promoter scores, and it's always been that way, right? So something NACS never really did at that high of an executive level before. It had always been store level training, was successful. And then as I continued my listening tour, which is really all I really do, is visiting companies, CEOs of companies, asking them, what are your issues? What are your unmet needs? Several years later, when I was CEO, a number of them said, our industry and our business is growing really fast, and it's getting much more complex than it used to be, and we don't really have the financial skill sets, the financial acumen. It would be really great if you could create a executive education program like you have at Cornell on executive leadership for finance. And so we did. We RFP'd the globally renowned academic institutions on finance. We selected Wharton. We put together a customized curriculum that's especially relevant to our industry and so forth for Wharton. And then 2 or 3 years later, also listening but also looking, I just saw a huge unmet need on marketing acumen in our industry. I saw an industry that's a sea of sameness. All the convenience stores do all the same things, right? And I saw when I talked to marketing executives in our industry, they were talking promotion. They weren't talking about marketing. When I said marketing, they, oh yeah, well, we run 2 FIRs on this or 3 FIRs on that. That's promotion. That's not marketing. Marketing is about brand promise, brand positioning, brand differentiation, and promotion is a piece of it here. So I ran that all by our loyalist companies at Cornell and at Wharton, and they said, absolutely, we need that. So RFPs, we selected Kellogg School of Management, which is globally renowned in that. And then following that, I was visiting with rising female leaders in our industry. Our industry has always had female store leaders. Disproportionate number of store managers in our industry are females, right? But, going back 20, 30 years ago, not many of them rose above that store level, but I started to see female leaders rising up in organizations. And when I talked to them, they would share with me stories about the differing experiences, dynamics that they had and were encountering in their careers. And with that, I spoke to a number of them about what can we do about that. And we created the Women's Leadership Program at Yale with that. And then the most recent one, 6 years ago, as this dynamic world, you got to kind of figure out, how do you do innovation? how do you adjust to a dynamic world? Well, you innovate. And by innovation, it's not like creating the next bright, shiny consumer product to sell. Most of it is innovating processes and things like that. And so we created the NACS MIT Innovation Leadership Program. All of those designed to help our industry not only survive, but prosper and grow in a very dynamic world, a very changing world, to equip their rising stars with a great foundation in management and in leadership, right? And if there is one thing that I haven't been able to quite achieve is to make sure that our members understand that their rising stars need to go to all of those programs, because a great leadership team, everybody on the team needs to have a rudimentary foundation in the principal tenets of management, right? With finance, marketing, innovation, leadership.
You go to every one of these events every year.
Yep.
Why?
Because the world changes. Because we have to make sure that the product resonates every year. So both professors, if my schedule permits, I love to go for all 5 days of every program. Sometimes I can only go a day or two, right? But I also, in negotiating contracts with the academic institution, always reserve 2 seats, free seats, for NACS staff members, because I need to grow. We need to grow our internal teams also. But they're also they're full participants, but they're also observers there. And we do big debriefs. So not only what professors resonate well and which ones don't, we need to change, but also what are the topics? And the world really changes. When we started Kellogg, which was, I think, 10 or 11 years ago, we had 0 on digital marketing because it really didn't exist 11 years ago. Today, 40 or 50% of the curriculum is about digital marketing. So you have to adjust. Nothing is the same who was it? Will Rogers, I think, once said, if you're on the right tracks long enough, a train's going to run you over, right? So you have to make sure what you're doing is solving today's problems and tomorrow's problems and not just yesterday's problems.
You said the world's changing, not
Yep.
the United States is changing,
Right.
which brings to the 5th point, the global marketplace and the importance of having a global radar and understanding what is offered in the world, because everybody wants convenience, everyone does it differently, and it's important to see those contrasts.
Yeah, so in my initial listening tour 20 years ago, I was visiting with several CEOs of some of our larger, most progressive members. And when I got to the question, is there things NACS isn't doing that it ought to be doing, they responded by saying, it used to be all of the great ideas in convenience and fuel retailing took place first in the United States. We're starting to see that's not true all the time, right? So it'd be very helpful to us if you could create kind of a global radar screen to identify not just new products, but new processes, new business models, new ways to even think about convenience from around the world. That would be really, really helpful to us. So, I would get invited to, at the time, I think in 2003, NACS had 3 international member companies. Today we have 73 in every continent other than Antarctica, right? And the only reason why we don't have any there is there are no convenience stores there, right? But as I started then to do the due diligence, a new listening tour, understanding what they were talking about, these progressive U.S. members, and visiting convenience retailers in different parts of the world, I started asking, I would always ask the question, what are your top 3 issues you're facing? What are the most important? And I was flabbergasted. They're exactly the same issues all around the world. All around the world. Labor, regulation, energy, they were the same. But then when I would look at countries, they were in radically different kind of life cycle positions of that, curve, right? And then I ran across a quote by a Canadian futurist, William Gibson, who said many years ago, "The future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed." Right? Part of the future is over here, part of it's there, part of it's there. And that has really been the foundation, the driving kind of fact of NACS's global engagement. And it has proved to be hugely valuable, not just to our U.S. members, because NACS is a global organization. Our noble cause is to better the industry, right? And we're U.S. based and we're U.S. born, but we've become really the only global organization in our industry, bringing together a larger tent at this point, but still bringing the industry together to share, best practices, evolving pieces, where the future is happening. So things like EV charging. Norway is far ahead the rest of the world. So let's learn from that. We have great Norwegian members we have great data from there. When we passed debit reform, most of the early data came out of Australia because they'd already done it. On advocacy even, we have a global government affairs council that I set up, and in one of those meetings when we asked the associations that were participating, hey, what are you doing in advocacy that's been successful? The Canadian Association said, we have this program, we invite members of parliament to come and work in stores, and they see our issues, and we donate to their charities. And, Lyle Beckwith, our senior VP in GR, and I listened to that, and we kind of looked at one another and said, well, U.S. politicians won't be motivated by us giving to charity, but how about if we give them media, right, in working in stores? And the very successful NACS in-store program where members of Congress, come and work a couple hours in a convenience store, and they learn our issues and they see it firsthand, right? You can go to Capitol Hill office and show them bank statements on credit card fees, and they go, yeah, I got that. Then they go to a convenience store and work in a convenience store. Somebody brings up a bottle of Coke and you scan it, and they pay with a debit card, and the store manager, that just cost us 25 cents. I go, you're kidding me, right?
One more thing on global. You had mentioned there was just a great conversation with them.
So the whole NACS in-store program, which has been amazingly effective in the United States. We launched it, 8 years ago, something like that. And it is really people seeing elected representatives actually at store level, the impact that various regulations have, right? But there's also a fabulous story that I will never forget. I think one of our very first in-stores was with a congressman in Utah, right? And the NACS team arranges for local media, TV stations, local TV, local newspapers to come and see, the congressman touring the facility. And we love to get them to work behind the counter sometimes, and they put on, the uniform. So one of the very first ones, congressman from Utah was doing an in-store, and he had his Maverick uniform on, was behind the counter. And a local TV reporter after the event asked him, well, did you enjoy the event today? Anything particularly you learned here? And he goes, well, this, by the way, this is on local TV. Well, I didn't realize how many people from the community come into convenience stores. I mean, it seemed to me like all my constituents came to the store today. These guys do an amazing job, and the food is terrific. And he's saying all these nice things about the store. And the reporter said, well, anything else? And he goes, well, yeah, there was one kind of humorous episode. I was working behind the counter, and this customer works in the front door of the store and looks at me with this really quizzical look, shakes his head, and then he goes over to the cooler. He gets a soft drink. He brings it up to the counter. He puts it down there. I scan it up, and he's still looking at me quizzically, and finally says, aren't you Congressman Bishop, I think was his name? And I said, yes, I am. Politicians love facial recognition. Yes, I am. And the customer said, what the hell happened? You get fired from Congress and you're working at Mavericks. It was just fabulous, right? That was on the nightly news in Salt Lake City, So some of these things are fun, and it also kind of shows how human our industry is.
That concludes part one of my two-part interview with Henry Armour. Join us next week when we talk about some of the industry's biggest triumphs over the past 20 years and what the future looks like. And as always, thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.